Who's the new kid? In the spirit of award season, Dave and I will be sharing our favorite new characters that we've met over the course of the past year. While they may not have exactly made their debut in the past 12 months, their impact on our journey deserves a hearty commendation nonetheless. Episode 91, The Byword, begins now. Welcome in, nerds, to another exclusive episode of the Nerd Byword podcast, the only podcast that walks the narrow tightrope of enough Batman already and, oh my god, is it March 4th yet? Dave and Kris are here once more to whisk you away on another nerd-filled adventure, complete with characters that we've met and fallen in love with over the past year. But first, it's time for... Dave, what the shell is going on?
You know, I don't know what to tell you because we just spoke about this last episode.
We are prophets. We are prophets.
Yeah, about She Who Shall Not Be Named, Venus de Milo, the much maligned character that was added, the fifth female turtle, to TMNT, The Next Mutation, a short-lived live-action series from the late 90s or something. And lo and behold, She Who Shall Not Be Named is making a comeback after 24 years on the sidelines. The character is now set to return in TMNT number 127 from IDW Publishing, written by Sophie Campbell and illustrated by Pablo Tunica. And so apparently Campbell has been, after reintroducing this character for some time, saying in a press release, "I've been trying to make a Venus comeback happen for a while, and I almost can't believe it's finally happening." In the same press release, editor Tom Waltz added, "It's been amazing to watch Sophie Campbell continue our long-running TMNT series with such careful consideration and commitment to the kind of character-driven storylines that have always been the foundation for what makes all things Turtles so beloved and eternal. And now she's crafted a clever plan to introduce a character from the past that many thought would never see the light of day again. She's doing it in fine fashion, continuing the IDW tradition of making the old feel both familiar and refreshing all at once, just in time for our big Armageddon game event, no less." Now, so, the funny thing is that this character, as we have ourselves hinted at many times on this show, has been much maligned over the years. It was sort of an extra character added to the very short-lived 1997 Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation, sort of retconned in as a fifth turtle that was exposed to the ooze and basically was mistakenly left behind by Splinter. He took all the male turtles but left the female one behind, because we know Splinter is a little like that, I guess we could say. And really, most did not like this character very much. Sort of a poor retcon and just a very oddly designed character too. Who knew that that turtles had in fact female breasts, human breasts? So made the design a little awkward. But what are you going to do? Now, of course. In the meantime, we have in the IDW series a new character that Kris has been ranting and raving about for some time now, the female turtle Jenica, who started out as a human that was mutated into a turtle. So, on the one hand, it's really interesting to see this character make a comeback. On the other hand, based on some of the concept art that's been released, it seems to me like this version of Venus de Milo is going to be significantly different from what we've seen in the past. There seems to be some kind of technological undercurrent going on there, some kind of powers, perhaps. She's seen in one of the pieces of art with blue flames in her hands that shape a yin-yang. She has oddly, shaped metallical protrusions in her shell. this may end up being Venus de Milo in name only. There's definitely going to be some significant changes to the character. Here's hoping that they're able to make, as they say in the press release, something old, both familiar and fresh, because Venus de Milo was, at least in this TMNT's fan, a mess of a character in her original incarnation. Kris, as our resident TMNT expert, what is your estimation of this news?
I'm just blown away because I literally, the piece that I made reference to that I was writing for Comics Bookcase, I sent in my rough draft, my first draft of that piece that should be premiering here pretty soon, maybe at the beginning of next month. And then I switch over to my news feed, and here is Venus de Milo, who the entire introductory paragraph of my piece was about, and like all of the sins of that creation. It's just wild to me. But at this point, I've run out of superlatives and adjectives to describe my feelings about this ongoing series. The seamless handoff to Sophie Campbell, and the entire creative team. The art's out of this world. Rhonda Pattison does some great work. Joni Nishijima Campbell does a lot of the art herself as well. I absolutely just love everything about this. And here's why I'm actually really excited about this. The ability to take these much maligned or dunked on factors of the fandom throughout the history. Look no further than Toka and Razor. Like that's one of the biggest criticisms that people have for the second one is we didn't get Bebop and Rocksteady. We got Toka and Razor. There's these cheap knockoffs. But they did a masterful job of bringing Toka and Razor into this ongoing series, albeit for just a few issues. But so if they can do that with Toka and Razor, why can't they do it with Venus de Milo? I think for me, the reason that Venus de Milo, even as a young child, was so upsetting was because just the idea of it, the concept of it was cool. It was just like there was no depth to the character. There was no real ideas or ingenuity behind it. It was just, it was very clear, as an adult now you can look at it and see they're trying to sell action figures. They're trying to get female fans, little girls buying the toys and everything too. So they were like, well, we got 4 males. We're getting all boys. Let's get some girls in here to buy toys too. So it was just a very, very cheap ploy. Famously, in my research, Peter Laird, the co-creator, absolutely hated the character, swore off everything to do with the character. When Image, actually, this is interesting as well, when Image had the comic book rights, there was a no Girl Turtles mandate from publishing. So that was interesting to find out, and just to see how far we've come to the point where I'm really excited to see how Sophie Campbell and company do this, because there was just a lot of potential that was just completely just eschewed, and almost that's one of the criticisms I think of Silk as well. A character that you love, Dave, bitten by the same spider as Peter, Venus, the same ooze but left behind for some reason. So there's a lot of criticisms left there, but I'm very excited about what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I will say the introductory, just to go off, your cue there, the introductory stuff that they did with Silk and Amazing Spider-Man was not very good. But once they spun her off into her own series, there was a lot to love there, and I think I continue to love a lot of her solo stuff. Just a very interesting dynamic that character has with some of the other characters around her, particularly in her most recent series. Her interactions with J. Jonah Jameson are actually absolutely fun and hilarious, and so very different of a dynamic than what Peter Parker Spider-Man has with that character. So I like Silk a great deal, although I will freely admit that the introductory storyline that brought her into the fold was not very good. But once you look past that, I think a very cool character. And I'm really hoping that, this return for Venus de Milo shakes out the same way, that we have, a character that came from kind of a weird place, but a talented team of writer and artist is able to take this and really make this character something special and unique. All right, Kris. Or should I say Kris? What have you got for news?
Well, a few weeks ago, Trekkers worldwide were stunned to hear the announcement that J.J. Abrams and company were indeed moving forward with the fourth installment in the Kelvin timeline film franchise, with the core cast returning, all of them. Add to the list of the party stunned by Paramount's phaser the aforementioned core cast themselves. According to The Hollywood Reporter, most, if not all, of the team surrounding stars Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, Carl Urban, Simon Pegg, Zoe Saldana, and John Cho were completely caught off guard by the announcement. Most fans had given up hope of a continuation of the series after contract talks stalled way back in 2018. But with the recent surge in popularity of the Trek property, thanks in no small part to the success of hits like Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, and Prodigy, Paramount and Viacom are certainly feeling more emboldened to make the push towards the big screen once more. The studio is reportedly hoping to finalize contract negotiations as soon as possible and begin shooting by the end of the year, with the goal of making that December 2023 release window. Dave, you and I both ride for this franchise. It's kind of a divisive, polarizing one for the Trek fandom. Are you excited for this?
I really am. Presupposing that they didn't put the cart before the horse and are actually able to nail down all the principal players, since apparently they didn't even have like contracts, locked in place. So basically, they've just entered negotiations with Chris Pine, since his Captain Kirk is sort of the linchpin of the whole franchise. Let's hope that they can lock everybody into place. This franchise is very interesting to me in a lot of ways. On the one hand, I, absolutely adore Shatner and Nimoy and that whole original crew. But on the other hand, to me, oftentimes I feel like that crew, Kirk and co, is sort of quintessentially what Star Trek is, those relationships. And most Star Trek shows have not been able to recapture that sort of dynamic. I think the one that, and already what I'm going to say, the one that basically, the only one that got as good of character relationships as the original Star Trek is ultimately Deep Space Nine. But Next Generation didn't have this kind of tight knit relationship group with such interesting dynamics because, we know that Gene Roddenberry didn't want inter-crew conflict because all the humans are perfect. And any potential in Voyager for that kind of conflict was quickly swept under the rug. So a lot of the shows are lacking that kind of, I don't know, that little bit of extra something, the crew dynamic, the relationships, which are based on friendship and love, but also very different, strong differences of opinion. And I think for that I always love the original crew in particular. And so I was a big fan of the first Star Trek remake. I was a little less of a fan of the second go around, Into Darkness, because no matter how often they said that they weren't doing Khan, it was very clear they were doing Khan. And I think the remix of that character kind of fell a little flat. I think what made Wrath of Khan so very good in a lot of ways was simply the fact that there was a long history there. They were relying on a storyline from the original show, and there had been time that went by, and there was a real natural animosity between Khan and Kirk based on their shared history. And without that shared history, I think that second movie fell a little flat for me. But then, I will freely admit, Star Trek Beyond there, that third entry felt very Star Trek-y suddenly, like it really tapped into something. And I was excited to see the franchise continue and was a little sad that the whole thing sort of fell apart. So I ride for this, man. I'm hoping that they have a good, solid script, or at the very least a good solid treatment, and they know where they're going with this. Because I love these characters, whether recast or not. There's something really special about this group of characters and how they interact with each other, and I just love to see it.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I love that it's almost like it is an alternate universe, and I think really it's really hard to recapture some of that same magic, and they somehow were able to do so. I think with the cast here, and the cast is. their chemistry with one another, particularly between Zachary Quinto and Chris Pine, is just magnificent. I love their back and forth. A little bit more animosity than we saw in the original series, but I think it's for the better, and I think it's just like a fun reimagining, almost like a what if you will. So I really enjoy this like core group of people. I enjoyed Into Darkness. Full disclosure, I watched that. I'm late to the Trek fandom, so I saw Into Darkness before Wrath of Khan. But even going back and revisiting, I think I'm such a fan of Benedict Cumberbatch's acting chops that I'm kind of willing to gloss over some of the criticisms of that. So I do still enjoy it, but I'm just reminded I'd never watched Beyond. I still have not watched Beyond, and that's something I need to remedy really quickly.
I recommend it. It felt a lot more Star Trek-y than the other two movies. A little less spectacle and a little more, introspection. I mean, don't get me wrong. There was still plenty of spectacle, but there was a really good story there that I found worked really well for this crew. So I was pleased with that. Plus, they had some references to like Enterprise era, which I thought was interesting. So there was some cool stuff in there. But I'm gonna go ahead and go full sacrilege for a second, if you don't mind. I wished, in a lot of ways, that Disney had the cojones to do what Paramount did here with Star Trek and do that with Star Wars, and that is go full hardcore recast their original characters, and give us some further adventures of Luke, Han, and Leia in that in between time between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. Like I would go for that, man. I would go for that. If the casting is done well and the writing is good, I would love to see more of that dynamic, because I will say that even if you're looking at the sequel trilogy, which has things that to go forward and things that didn't go so well, and even if you look at the prequel trilogy, which had good things, Obi-Wan Kenobi for the most part, and a whole bunch of bad stuff too, I don't think any relationships in Star Wars ever surpassed the core three of the original trilogy either. Luke, Han, Leia, the way they interact with each other and stuff in that original trilogy. I would love to see more of that. And if that requires a recast, I think there are plenty of really good possibilities out there. I mean, we've already recast Han Solo, and I think the acting performance was fine. The movie had other problems with it, but I think, let's be bold and at least give it a shot and just go full recast. As good as the technology is of, de-aging, deep faking Mark Hamill there, it's not the same thing as having an actor act, and so yeah, I would love if they would do this. I'll just say it, and I know there's going to be a lot of Star Wars fan like, sacrilege, but I really don't care. Like, it worked with Star Trek, and I would be interested to see if it can work with Star Wars.
I totally agree. Unfortunately, I think it'll never happen. I think they are too afraid of exactly that. They're too afraid of the outrage. They are too afraid of the fans that are beholden to the past. And I really wish that was the case, because the CGI was markedly better this time around, but it's
because they hired that YouTube guy.
But it's just disturbing. I'm sorry, it's disturbing, and spoilers, but I'm glad he didn't show up again past that one episode, because it was just like, it just made me a little bit queasy. Like, it was almost too good.
The other problem, of course, is that the voice is not de-aged; it's synthesized. It's a fake voice.
Yeah.
I read a little bit about how they did that, and they basically fed a whole bunch of, old Mark Hamill lines from that time period into a computer, and then have the computer basically do the voice. And I think that accounts for some of the lifeless delivery that we're getting there, because it is literally a lifeless delivery. And I think, we can't, if you're going to try to continue telling stories in a franchise that has been around for decades, you have to be willing to be bold and do some recasting.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you won't be able to push forward. Look at a show like Doctor Who, which has been around since 1963. The whole reason that show has been able to continue at all is because of the consistent recasting. And they went so far as to write a mechanism into the actual story to make the recasting plausible so they can continue. And I think at some point, you cannot tell me that Star Wars fans, especially, old school Star Wars fans like myself wouldn't line up around the block if they would announce that they're bringing in a new cast and they're doing basically a version of the Heir to the Empire trilogy, and basically saying, okay, this is the story of what happened between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy, and you get to see these characters sort of, at their height, at their best. I would be first in line. I'll freely admit I would be all about something like that. I would love to see Luke, Han, and Leia take on Grand Admiral Thrawn. Like that is my jam right there. But it requires some boldness. And let's be honest, I don't think you'll ever please Star Wars fans because most of them are bitter old guys living in the basement, I think. And it's sad how the Star Wars fandom has fractured into a bunch of bitter old people when there's so much good content being produced right now for fans. So I'm there for it, and I'm there for the Star Trek sequel too. I'm looking forward to it, man.
We may have just answered this question, but I'm curious to get your opinion on this. Why do you think, and I was super excited when J.J. Abrams came on to do the sequel trilogy and it was announced because he had done so well, I thought, with Trek. Why do you think, at least in our opinion, it works so well with Star Trek, but not so much with Star Wars?
I think that when they were making the Star Trek movies, what they're really doing is they're not making a trilogy. They're not making something interconnected, right? Every movie is sort of standalone, and so the planning is all internal. So if JJ comes around and has to hand it off to another director, they're just going to tell a very different kind of Star Trek story, and it's still going to work. It doesn't have to connect in meaningful ways to the previous movie, is what I'm saying. And what we ended up with, I think, with the Star Wars trilogy is first of all that there was no plan, but it was touted as a trilogy, which means there had to be meaningful story threads that go through all three movies. And I think with the handoff between directors, it just didn't work because they didn't have an overarching plan that each director followed. And I think the other problem is that it's very much that recasting thing. We have all the original characters back that are so beloved with good actors doing those characters justice. Whereas in Star Wars, we had to get a whole bunch of new characters that had to be introduced while still trying to have the legacy characters around to sort of hand off, the baton, so to speak. And I think it's just that they ended up being two very different beasts. I think if you would have given J.J. Abrams a movie and said, okay, you're going to recast Luke, Han, and Leia, and you're going to do a story 5 years after Return of the Jedi, and you have your trilogy there with these characters and their continuing story, and you don't have to introduce any new characters or reinvent the wheel or anything, I think he would have probably delivered a significantly better Star Wars movie, and we might have gotten a significantly better trilogy overall.
Do you think the episodic nature of Trek versus the saga storytelling of Star Wars gives it that advantage as well?
Yes, I think that's absolutely one of the big advantages of Trek. Technically, you could have a different director come in for every Trek movie and just completely make a new story, no problem. If you look at the history of Star Trek movies, the only time there was any meaningful, story threads going from movie to movie, it was basically Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, and The Voyage Home. That basically is the closest thing that Star Trek ever came to, a trilogy. And even those movies are all very different from each other.
I love the Whale movie.
Approaches.
The Whale movie might be my favorite Star Trek movie. I love that movie.
It is so very Star Trek and how it plays with time travel, how it plays with how it comments on contemporary society. It's the most quintessential Star Trek movie. It's less about action and more about just a really solid story that really has something to say. So yeah, I keep coming back to this notion that a recast could work if you do it right, just because it worked for Star Trek, and I cannot see. I cannot see the majority of Star Wars fans not enjoying movies if the casting is done well that tell the continuing adventures of Luke, Han, and Leia. I think there would be totally a market for that kind of trilogy, I guess.
Sebastian Stan is literally right there.
You're not kidding, and we already have a Han Solo. All we need now is a Leia.
How about her daughter, Billie Lourd? How amazing would that be?
That would be awesome, yeah. I want to say that, ironically, I've read an article, it might have been a couple of years ago, where Millie Bobby Brown actually said she would love to play a young Leia in a movie. And she's actually getting up there in her age now. She just is like 18, 19 now or something, that she could conceivably pull something like that off. And I think it's fair to say that the lady has acting chops. So
yeah, she's the only human I didn't want to die in the Godzilla movies. So
yeah, there you go. the only human that came across as human, you mean?
Yeah. All right, that wraps up an extended edition of Nerd News. When we come back with the Byword Big Talk, we're just bursting at the seams with characters we love. So stick around. All right, we're back for this week's Byword. And we're a very character-oriented show. We love strong characters. And so we came up with the idea of, we've been reading a lot. We've been consuming a lot of media, watching a lot of shows. Over the past year, who are the new people? Not necessarily new publication-wise. Maybe they've been around for a couple of years, couple of decades even, that we've really gotten to know over the past year or so, that we really just absolutely love. And is our tradition, we each pick 3, and we're just going to gush about them. So Dave, I've never heard of this person at all.
Yeah, well, until very recently, neither had I. It's sort of a very odd situation where, you end up signing up for DC Universe Infinite and start reading a whole bunch of stuff. And lo and behold, you come across a series that looks really interesting. So Manhunter, specifically the Catherine Spencer version of Manhunter, is probably one of my new favorite characters. And I'm going to talk more about the series in general as my nerd commendation. Spoilers! But I really want to talk a little about the character. So Kate Spencer is like the 4th or 5th character in the DC universe to carry the Manhunter title. All of these various characters have completely different backgrounds and origin stories. It's kind of all over the place, really. But in 2004, writer Marc Andreyko and artist Jesus Saiz. I'm horrible with pronunciations of non-German names, as you all know. They created Catherine Spencer, a district attorney in Los Angeles who becomes disillusioned with the fact that the superpowered villains keep getting put out on the street, and goes into evidence locker and gets a whole bunch of equipment that has been confiscated from various heroes and villains over the years, puts on a suit, a mask, grabs a staff, and hunts down the villain Copperhead and kills him. And from there on, builds a reputation as the Manhunter, a superhero that, although usually doesn't kill, is not above killing if it's the only way to get justice. So she is not, she's not like a Punisher kind of character. She's more of a, if there is no other way to stop this guy, I'm willing to go that extra mile. She's a very, very complex and interesting character. In an age where so many characters that are introduced are always like really young or teens, or we have to have Spidey, for example, always be single. Catherine Spencer is a woman. She's fully fleshed out. She has a past. She has an ex-husband. She has a young son. And she shares custody. She is a chain smoker who's constantly trying to quit smoking in the early issues, but keeps having to pick it back up. And as the story progresses, she realizes she actually has some surprising ties to past superheroes, specifically the World War II era superheroes. But through all that, she's just a very hard-edged character. In the courtroom scenes, she's just cold as ice, and the other lawyers always fear her. Even when she messes up, she usually is able to kind of squeeze a win out of it. And as a superhero, she's not exactly one of the quippy nature. She's very, very hard-nosed and gets the job done. She's just an incredibly tough character. And I absolutely adore this character for that. And it's unbelievable to me that this character had, her own ongoing series that lasted for several years. Then the series was canceled, and apparently this character has just disappeared off the face of the earth, because apparently, like, she does not appear anywhere else. And it kind of blows my mind, because it's just such a fantastic character. It's so well written. The art is fantastic on this series. And she's just absolutely, I don't know, it's just enrapturing as a character. You just want to constantly read more of her. So, DC, what in the world are you thinking? You have this fantastic character there, and poof, she's gone. I mean, what the crap, Kris?
Yeah, I'm getting some serious Daredevil vibes, you know, as someone who swore up and down they were going to law school and then, you know, changed majors in college, but I was a sucker for all those John Grisham novels as a kid. I read every single one of them. Like I love legal thrillers. That's always been my cup of tea. So stuff like Daredevil has always been fascinating to me. So this is definitely a character that I am very intrigued in, but I hate like the fact that like they're out of publication now, and then you know you have something so strong and then they just vanish into thin air, like just wild.
And in typical me fashion, I enjoyed reading these adventures on DC Universe Infinite so much that I picked up the trade paperback. So if you need a good read, I'm more than willing to play library and check them out to
Yeah,
you. I think you'd really enjoy this character,
yeah, for
Kris.
sure.
All right, Kris, who is your first new character that you've encountered over the last year that you really enjoy?
Okay, so pun fully intended, but it looks like we're on the same page because my nerd commendation is going to be getting more in depth of this character and where I met them today. So stay tuned for that. But my new favorite character in all of comics is Sooraya Qadir, uh, known by her mutant code name as Dust, or even more recently as Congregation in X-Men Onslaught Revelation. She is a woman from Afghanistan, a very devout Muslim. She wears the traditional niqab. Um, was created in December of 2002 by Grant Morrison and an artist that shall not be named, and in the new X-Men Volume 1, and is just a fascinating character. You know, I've always um, been intrigued and fascinated with cultures around the world that specifically those that are different than mine. I see myself in the mirror every day. I know my day-to-day life. I know, you know, all about that. But like I'm always interested in getting different perspectives, different points of view. And so she was actually kidnapped and sold into slavery as a child until she was rescued by Wolverine and Phantom X. And then she becomes in my nerd commendation today, the second volume of New X-Men, she's one of those core students in that group. And, you know, as you could imagine, it's quite a culture shock coming to the United States and living in a different culture, and how she interacts with other people in a respectful manner, despite her devout faith, is just truly fascinating to watch, and such an admirable character. You know, much love is given to Nightcrawler, one of our faves, for being a devout Catholic and being a man of faith and what have you. But she is equally as fascinating in her own respective faith, and just seeing that in a religion that is not my own is truly fascinating, and seeing how she deals with the complexities of being a superhero and having not only that, she has this devout faith and this inner tranquility and peace. Um, but then she has the mutant ability to turn into sand, as dust would suggest, and she can completely just flay the skin off of human beings, leaving nothing but skeletal remains. Like there are scenes from New X-Men Volume 2 where I believe you encountered William Stryker and his purifiers with God Loves Man Kills, but this is
Yes.
a good few decades later. But they come back again, and these bigoted clowns coming after her, of course, as a Muslim woman, and she completely just leaves nothing but bones left, because they are just completely just destroyed by her. So having the kind of the duality of this calm, tranquil, quiet person with this powerhouse, power set is just fascinating to see the duality in that character. So I absolutely love her. She is going to be on the new team with Nightcrawler, with the Legionnaires in this Krakoan era, and Arakko in the new planet Arakko of Mars. That I'm very, very excited to see what new things come for this character.
Yeah, once again, you're throwing a character at me from the X-Men franchise, and you're going to end up making me having to read some of these old X-Men series. Not that I've not read any X-Men, but Morrison in particular has a special place in my heart, as you well know, particularly for his understanding of Superman. So if Morrison had his hand in the creation of this character, then I am definitely interested in learning more.
All right, Dave, I knew this one was going to come up, but it's an amazing character, and we should always take as much time as we can in an episode to rave about this character.
Yeah, I will never get tired of talking about the best character that I have encountered over the last year or so, and that is, of course, Joe Mullein from Far Sector and the Green Lantern franchise, who has literally now become my all-time favorite Green Lantern by a country mile at this point. I adored the Far Sector series. I just absolutely gobbled it up. I'm kind of a little bit behind on the current Green Lantern series, but I absolutely adore the fact that they created a storyline that immediately put Joe sort of in the center of the story, because her Green Lantern ring is not connected to the central power battery. It is self-recharging basically. And so in the current Green Lantern series, there's been an attack on Oa, and the central power battery is blown up, and all these Green Lanterns die or are stranded out in space and have to contend without their rings. And here's Joe returning to Oa, and her ring is still working. She basically slides in a leadership role and is kind of trying to hold the Green Lantern Corps together. And there's a fantastic scene in the first few issues of the series where she actually has to deal with longtime Hal Jordan villain Sinestro, and she just does not put up with his crap. It is such a good scene, and just it speaks so well of this character who is so strong and tough and funny, and just like everything that you would hope a superhero character would be. She's really, in every way, shape, or form, to me, the perfect lead of a Green Lantern story. And anytime that this character will be in the center of the action is when I want to be there. Like, I would love to see her in like a Justice League lineup, for example. Like, she is, to me, the quintessential Green Lantern. I absolutely adore her.
Yeah, I'm dying to know more about this character. I still have not had the chance to go and read the rest of Far Sector. I read the first issue and absolutely adored it. I have all of them sitting on my shelf. I just haven't had the time to go read that. And I believe even in the Future State, she's the Green Lantern in the Future State books, right?
That's what I gathered. I was not horribly enthusiastic with reading the Future State books, just because those sorts of things don't have a good track record at DC. They did something similar where they flashed forward to a dystopian style future a few years ago during their New 52 era, and it was probably one of the most obnoxious stories ever. And even in Future State, they did some really weird crap by turning like Wally West Flash into some kind of weird, crazy villain. So, I'm always weary of these flash forwards, but having her on a future Justice League, not that I can get behind.
Yeah, so I'm just dying to see more from this character, and the fact that it's always refreshing when a new character is truly like complex, and like really it just hits it out of the park, because like it's something new and undiscovered, and seeing her flex right in this new Green Lanterns run is so promising. So I'm definitely gonna have to check this out.
Yeah, it's just I cannot speak highly enough of Far Sector. I just can't. It's a masterpiece in my book. And any fan of DC Comics, any fan of good science fiction should read this darn book. It's just so very good. What a great 12-issue maxi series. Just so fantastic, Kris. All right, so who is your second favorite new character that you've encountered?
Okay, so as you all full and well know, I have a very complicated fandom and relationship with Star Wars. Like it's something that at my core I love, but then anytime that I get too excited about it, the fandom menace just strikes again. And so one of the things that I've really enjoyed over the past few weeks is getting caught up on this new era of Star Wars comics, the High Republic. And my favorite character, far and away, is the main protagonist, and that's Jedi Knight Keeve Trennis. Um, she has got like this. She's got a little Han Solo like lovable scoundrel to her. Like as a Jedi Knight, formerly a Padawan, her Jedi master that trained her as a Padawan, Skier. I hope I'm saying that right. Skier is a Trandoshan. A Trandoshan Jedi Master. Just the notion of that is just awesome. So I love that. The Rise of Skywalker, as we've talked about so many different times, left me really cold with where to go from here with Star Wars. The Mandalorian's done a lot of help, kind of reviving that love, but at the same time, it feels kind of limited. But this High Republic stuff has really been fun and imaginative and bright and exciting. And so Keeve Trennis is really exciting to see as a main character who's got a foul mouth. She accidentally curses when she's speaking to like the Jedi Council and stuff, and she's got like a heart of gold and like goes against what her superiors tell her to do because she thinks it's the next right thing to do. And just seeing her adventures in this new and imaginative world, working alongside the Hutt cartels in an unlikely partnership has really been fun. So, probably a future nerd commendation coming very soon is these High Republic comics, and Keeve Trennis is probably the main reason for that.
Yeah, I have not touched any of these the High Republic era. I've been hearing a lot of good stuff about the comics and the novels, and that it's sort of is reviving Star Wars for a lot of people. I guess I just have a little kind of weird taste in my mouth about the Jedi Order, particularly after the prequels, about how they've sort of been portrayed. It's very much a deeply flawed order and not nearly what you kind of were expecting
Hmm.
when you were watching the original trilogy of movies. When Luke throws his lightsaber from him in Return of the Jedi and looks at the Emperor and says, "I'm a Jedi like my father before me," and you're like, "Yay!" And then you realize the Jedi were a bunch of morons who were blind to the rise of the dark side and all that, and you're like, "Well, maybe not yay."
Yeah.
And then you see the Last Jedi, and then you're like, oh, he messed up his Jedi Order too. So definitely not yay. So I don't know. The whole Jedi thing has left kind of a weird taste in my mouth. I'm hoping that eventually I'm able to dive into this and see, I don't know, some kind of um, new spark to the idea of a Jedi Order, because I think that if you look at the Skywalker saga, the whole 9 movie cycle as
Mhm.
a whole, the Jedi don't exactly come across very well.
No, and I share those same trepidations, even now as I'm reading this. But I will say, like contextually, and this is what they're marketing it as, is it's the Jedi at their strongest in their heyday when they were clicking on all cylinders. Um, and what we saw in the prequels was just like those last wet farts when you're on hospice care, I guess. Um, for lack of a better analogy, that kind of seems dark, um,
Yeah.
it really has been fun to see. I think it's what, like I said earlier, with like just being so disappointed in something, is all that excitement about this like new and imaginative direction that the prequels gave for me. I think what makes me so frustrated with them is like you have this open world and this open box to imagine things with, and you kind of regress to the least imaginative things. And so this is kind of scratching that itch of what I wanted the prequels to be.
Yeah, see, now that gives me a little bit of hope that this is actually, something of quality. I'll definitely have to check it out.
Yeah, there's also a companion series that I haven't tapped into yet from IDW that that is like the Adventures series. So that's a completely different one, but features a lot of the same characters. So I'm excited to check that one out too. All right, Dave, your next character has been around for quite a while, so I'm interested to hear your encounters with them.
Yeah, so I think the short version is that I've not had a whole lot of encounters with the 616 version of Jessica Drew Spider Woman over the years. Um, I was naturally kind of, aware of the existence of this character, but as far as like reading, a solo series or seeing her in any kind of team setting, not really. Occasionally I would read Spider-Man and she'd pop up, but for the most part I wasn't really familiar with the character, what she's all about, what her history is. And then I decided to kind of get into the whole Bendis Avengers era and, trying to read as much of that as possible and get kind of a sense for the impact that Bendis had on the Avengers as a team. And obviously she featured extremely prominently there. Ultimately, I hope this is not a spoiler for anybody listening, but ultimately the Jessica Drew that's introduced at the beginning of that series is revealed to be a Skrull, and the real one gets reintroduced, and she has some trauma because she's been kidnapped by Skrulls for this whole time, and that's the whole thing. But spinning sort of out of that era of Avengers, I decided to get to know her a little better. So I decided to read a mini series where Bendis kind of streamlined her origin, and then she got a short-lived solo series that was also written by Bendis and had art by a frequent collaborator of his, Alex Maleev, who just does this incredibly moody and very, very cool artwork. And although the series only lasted for I think 7 issues, it kind of gave me a taste for more. So then I jumped into her next solo series, and I'm about halfway through that one where she kind of ditches the skin-tight outfit and goes with sort of a more practical sort of leather jacket look. And she's working with Ben Urich, the reporter, and trying to help the common people and look at the small picture instead of always looking at the big picture like she did with the Avengers. And as I sort of read more and more about this character, I have to say I really, really like her. There's something there that I didn't expect. There's a depth, there's a toughness. I mean, the way the character kind of has been on both the side of good and the side of evil, working for Hydra for a while. How she worked, for Shield for a while, for Nick Fury, and she has all this spy experience and this combat experience, and she's worked as a private detective, and there's all these interesting threads that come together in this character. I'm actually quite impressed, and so I've decided I'm going to continue reading all of her solo stuff and just keep trying to get a better sense for this character. I know that there is a new solo series that's running right now. I'm not quite there yet, but I hear good things about it as well. So here's a character that basically was, from my understanding, sort of a throwaway character when she was first introduced, just to kind of secure the trademark for Spider-Woman. But over time, I think creators have really done something unique and interesting with her, and I'm very, very excited to finally, after all these years of being a fan of Spider-Man, to actually get to know Spider-Woman.
Yeah, it really is funny. And if you want like a crazy behind the scenes history, go look up the history of the origins of Spider-Woman and just the mad dash to get the copyright. It's really crazy. So, but at the same time, I think it kind of gave subsequent creators like some leeway and some autonomy to kind of go crazy and kind of write their own story, if you will. So yeah, I don't have a whole lot of exposure to this character, but I've heard great things about the Pacheco and Perez run. So I'm definitely gonna have to check that one out too.
All right, Chris, that brings us to your third and final new character.
Okay, so I don't have a lot of depth on this character. I am watching Young Justice for the first time. I'm still in season 1. I want to say I'm about like episode 15, but I already know that I absolutely love Kaldur'ahm, Aqualad, whatever you want to call him. I call him amazing. I love this character. In fact, he is about the only character that I can stand on this show. A couple of my friends have insisted that I have to watch Young Justice, so I'm watching it slowly but surely. And part of the reason that it's been kind of a lull is because Kaldur'ahm is the only one that has any kind of common sense. I love the idea of having Martian Manhunter's niece, Miss Martian. I love the idea of having her. Love Martian Manhunter as a character. His niece is a very Pollyanna girl, very like, oh no, what's going on? Her power set's great, but she's completely clueless. Sorry. I'm 100% sure that this Superboy, what is his name, Connor Kent. I'm 100% sure this clone of Superman stormed the Capitol on January 6th. He is giving very much. He's giving very much fake military boy. I can't stand him. He's such a meathead. He's such a doofus. I hope he gets better. Kid Flash needs to have his molecules rearranged in his face. And I'm talking about by my fists, because he is the whiniest little twerp, and he thinks he's awesome, but he is so not. Robin's okay, I guess. I think this is the Tim Drake version of the character. He's okay. And then I ride with Artemis. Artemis is cool. Artemis is great. But Kaldur'ahm, and this, I love that he is this reluctant leader, and he leads with quiet strength. And all the while, you have all these other noisy personalities that really think they are the stuff, but he's the only one that has it all together. And so watching his development and watching his history and just the Atlantis aspect is much more fascinating. I love Kaldur'ahm, and I know that there's been some hems and haws about seasons 3 and 4. I already know that going forward. I don't know really any spoilers, really. I just know that people aren't as crazy about the newer stuff. But I'm here for Kaldur'ahm, and that's the only reason I'm showing up.
So I will first of all echo your love of this character. If only they could have done him justice when they tried to introduce him in the comic books back in the day. Because let me tell you, they didn't. This is probably the best and most fully realized version of this character. And if you like him in Young Justice, I'm sad to say that there's really, unless something has changed and I missed it completely, there is no other place to get this character this well written. Does not exist in the comic books, regrettably.
Yeah.
However,
I will say my
ahead.
friends are going wild about Jackson Hyde. So I really need to dive into these, pun intended, Aquamen books, because I've heard nothing but great things about them.
Yeah, and Jackson Hyde is a very cool character, but not the same character as what you're seeing here, obviously. As far as Young Justice goes, I feel like I have to step up and defend the show a little bit. Because Kid Flash, the way he's portrayed here, is very much in line with a young Flash who is a little full of himself. It's a little bit inspired, I think, from the Impulse character. He's supposed to be in that position because one of the cool things about the show is that he grows a lot over the course of the show. And I think you can say that for many of the characters. They're all, in some extent, deeply flawed. Kaldur'ahm comes out as sort of the coolest character out of the get-go, whereas the other characters have a much further distance to travel in their growth. So as you're watching the show, I think Kaldur'ahm is at a consistent level of coolness, whereas all the other characters go through big changes as they move forward. I'm assuming you have not seen the Miss Martian episode where you get more about her background yet?
Not yet.
And where her character comes from and why she acts the way she does. Man, I'm telling you, when you see that episode, it's going to completely change the way you view her. It's very, very interesting how she built that version of herself and why she did it, because that's not quite the true Miss Martian. There is a complexity there that comes along as the show progresses that I think you're going to very much appreciate. But one of the things ultimately that always happens is that you can't start those characters off fully formed sometimes when you're trying to do long form storytelling like that. So they kind of dump them in like a really bad spot. I will say though that this version of Connor Kent Superboy is probably by far my least favorite. And I write for that character. I always have, even when he was first introduced in the comic books after the Death of Superman storyline in the 90s, running around in a leather jacket and all that and thinking he's the coolest thing ever. He was just a very neat character and also went through a tremendous amount of growth in the comic books. But this character never quite clicked for me as well. I don't think the writing was quite there when it comes to the Superboy character. And just for correction's sake, believe it or not, the Robin in Young Justice is in fact actually Dick Grayson, and you're going to see him become. And you're going to see him become Nightwing when they start jumping forward in time a little bit, and all the characters start getting older. So it is in fact Dick Grayson, and you will see a Tim Drake Robin later. He also gets introduced along with Batgirl and several other ancillary characters from the Bat universe. But that is Dick Grayson, believe it or not.
Okay, because like when she started dating Superboy, I was like, of course, this is every late 90s, early 2000s teen drama where the cheerleader starts dating the meathead, and he's really not that bad once you get to know him type of trope.
You're going to start, and this is maybe putting the cart before the horse, but there's a period in Young Justice where you start wondering if Superboy isn't the less meatheady person in that relationship. like Miss Martian, there's a darkness there that you have not encountered yet, my friend.
I will say that Rob Lowe as Captain Marvel / Shazam is literally one of my favorite parts of season 1.
Oh, easily. That portrayal is absolutely fantastic.
All right, that wraps up our Byword Big Talk. Who are your favorite new characters? Who have you been reading along with, watching alongside that just has captured your heart over the past year? Be sure to hit us up on social media at Nerd Byword on Twitter and Instagram, or individually That Nerd Dave, That Nerd Kris, respectively. When we come back from this, our final break, we're coming at you with the previously promised Nerd Commendations. All right, we are back, Dave, with our favorite segment. We know it as Commendations. Now, speaking of carts being put before a horse, we kind of spoiled this one already, but oh well.
Yeah, I don't feel bad about this. I mentioned that I'm a big fan now of Kate Spencer Manhunter, so it would be obviously not surprising when I sit here and tell you that I want to nerd commend Manhunter Volume 3, which consists of 38 issues, all written by Marc Andreyko, and of course art for a huge chunk of the series, really the bulk of it by Jesus Saiz. Look, man, this is from an era of DC Comics where things were, just a little bit different. We have the old DC logo that was, predominant in the early 2000s. And for me, that era holds a special place in my heart. There was very, very cool stuff going on. We're talking about, the era of Infinite Crisis, the era of 1 year later. It's just a very, very cool little era in DC history. And to think that as many comic books as I was reading from DC at the time, that Manhunter slipped past me the way it did is totally, like, I feel personally responsible for the fact that this series didn't last longer. Like, people like me who would have adored this series didn't even think to give it a chance. And that's so typical. We always cling to like the big names. And when there's something new and interesting introduced, we just, we take a step back from it and we don't want to really give it a chance. And I really should have given Manhunter a chance because it is absolutely fantastic. So the series follows Kate Spencer, a district attorney in LA who gets sick and tired of all these supervillains, getting off the hook. So she cobbles together an outfit and equipment from a evidence locker and starts going after supervillains. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, she's incredibly tough. She's fascinating. She's a fully formed adult woman with, an ex-husband and a kid she's trying to, co-parent, and there's all sorts of interesting stuff going on with her. She's a chain smoker and tries to stop smoking constantly, and you have this wonderful juxtaposition between courtroom drama and really hard-hitting superheroics. And so, you think on the one hand, it sounds a little bit daredevilish or something, but I think the fact that for a good chunk of this, she's a DA, it makes the whole thing feel very, very different. Also, the kind of cases she deals with are fascinating. There's a wonderful case about halfway through the series where Wonder Woman is actually being put on trial for the murder of Max Lord, which is something that happened in the lead up to Infinite Crisis. And so there's this whole grand jury proceeding going on about whether she's going to be indicted or not. And Wonder Woman gets Kate Spencer actually to represent her, and you get these very, very cool interactions between Kate and Wonder Woman, and Kate and Batman, and these are all characters that you see through a very different lens, because she's a street level hero who's never really encountered any of these people. Wonder Woman is a goddess to her, and Batman is a myth, and so her interactions with them are absolutely fascinating. And right now, I'm kind of reaching the end of the series. I'm on issue like 32 out of 38, I think. And she just encountered the new Blue Beetle as she is investigating a series of murders right across the border in Mexico, where some 400 women have disappeared. And she's trying to figure out why these women are disappearing. And she teams up with Blue Beetle for that one. And it's not just a really cool entry sort of in the DC universe, but it's just a fantastic character that you're following with this show. I'm also a really, really big fan of some of the ancillary stuff that they do. There's a cool storyline where all the previous people who have been, manhunters are suddenly being hunted themselves. And Kate is sort of the end of the line, the newest and the last manhunter, and she's going to be able to figure out who's trying to kill all manhunters. There's just really, really cool stuff in this comic book, and it pains me that the sucker only lasted 38 issues. There is something here, and it deserved to last longer.
Yeah, I mean, like Blue Beetle, like you got me in. I love the Jaime Reyes. Like, it had its warts with some of the Spanish in there made me cringe, but I love that run so much when we did that for homework a while back. So I love that character. I'm super excited to see them come up on the big screen. But if they're popping up here, that is probably and detective stuff. I mean, like, that you and I both love detective stories. Shouts to Columbo. And anytime you get some stuff like that, I'm all in.
Yeah, I'm just all about this series right now. It kind of got its hooks in me. I really, as you know, I nerd commended a few weeks ago the Triangle era of Superman, and my entire intention was to use DC Universe Infinite to just reread the entire Triangle era. And I got a little sidetracked with Manhunter. I will freely admit I've been reading Manhunter pretty much every evening before I go to bed right now, because that series has just got its hooks in me. All right, Chris, what is your nerd commendation for this week?
Well, I teased it before, but if you like what we talked about with Sooraya Qadir, aka Dust or Congregation, then I highly nerd commend New X-Men Volume 2, more affectionately known by us superfans as Academy X era. And I've talked about this before when I nerd commended Generation X. Every generation, pun intended, of X-Men fans kind of has their book that was the quintessential book when they were, growing up. If you're a kid of the 70s, it's, the Claremont X-Men books. If you're an 80s child, then it's, the New Mutants and that team. If you're a 90s kid, then it is, Generation X. And if you're a 2000s kid, it's the Academy X era. And so I'm kind of in between the 90s and 2000s. This particular volume ran from 2004 to 2008. So the middle to the latter half of my high school years, and then the start of my college years was when this was coming out. So it was kind of fun going back at a time machine and thinking about like what was going on in the world when this book, was current. And so it takes a lot of the characters that were introduced in Volume 1 in Grant Morrison's run, and now these kids are at school, and it really just focuses on their stories, and it really has a fascinating, cast of characters. In addition to Dust, we have Elixir, Josh Foley, Icarus, Jay Guthrie, Prodigy, David Elaine, Surge, Noriko Ashida. She's the worst. Surge is awful. She's the worst. We all hate Surge. Wallflower, Lori Collins. Wind Dancer, Sophia Montega. She's perfect, Your Honor. Wither, Kevin Ford. I mean, there's just so many characters. There's a Knoll. There's Rock Slide. Hellion is great. So it's just like this whole. It's like it's really interesting too. It's like maybe it's the teacher in me. I love seeing kids thriving. I love teen books. And even though that these characters are probably in their late teens, early 20s now, just seeing them grow up and having these life-changing multiple moments. This famously took place during the era of the decimation and the events that spilled out of House of M and the depowering and the eradication of the majority of the mutant population, with only 198 mutants being left on the face of the earth. So you see the after effects of that. So there are two markedly different creative teams on this. About the first half of this book, you see the husband and wife writing team of Nuncio De Filippis and Christina Weir. And it is very much that bubblegum poppy teenage book where you have these kids that are from different backgrounds, different power sets in this case, thrust into the same living spaces. They have to bunk up with roommates that are completely different from them. They don't always get along. Surge is super racist and Islamophobic towards Dust. She's the worst. We hate her. And it's really bad. It's really cringy, and it's very much of its time. Think back to where we were in 2004 with the fear coming out of 9/11, and so the script and the words that are given to Surge are very much of that time. But if you're willing to look past that, there are some really great character moments and some bonding moments. There's a beautiful moment between Sooraya and Jay Guthrie, who we previously met in Chuck Austin's She Lies with Angels, one of the worst comic books that I've ever read, the Redneck Romeo and Juliet, as I call it. But he's from the hills of Kentucky. If you know anything about the X-Men, the Guthries, Mama Guthrie, she is a human, but she makes mutant babies. She has a bunch of babies, and they are all mutants. So she is probably one of the greatest allies that mutantdom has, because she makes a bunch of mutant babies. So Jay comes from the hills of Kentucky, and you think, what are his interactions going to be with this devout Muslim woman from Afghanistan, from the Middle East? What is that going to look like? And it's this very respectful, beautiful exchange where he is nervous because he doesn't want to offend her, but he wants to have a deeper friendship and possibly relationship. There's a will they, won't they. There's beautiful exchanges between Sooraya and his mother, Mama Guthrie. And then after the events of House of M, it takes a markedly different turn. And that teeny bopper teenage drama type stuff is gone. And it is straight on trauma train, baby. Everybody's dying left and right. There's only 198 mutants worldwide. Half the kids are depowered, so they're dealing with that trauma. And then you're getting targeted by the Purifiers, led by William Stryker, and it is just an action-packed, and that is written by the dynamic duo of Craig Kyle and Christopher Yost. So if you love trauma, and you love action-packed and kids fighting for their lives, then definitely check out the second part of it. But as a whole, I've really come to fall in love with a lot of these characters, particularly Sooraya, particularly Hellion. Hellion starts off with this character as this, snooty kid. He thinks he's better than everybody. He's a bit of an asshole. But then, after the events of House of M and the decimation, he's forced to be this team leader, and he doesn't know what to do with this new role. And so he's really come to be an endearing character to me. And then Sophia Montego, Wind Dancer, she's just gorgeous. She's wonderful. She's everything. So I love this era of comics. Thank you to my friends for recommending it to me. Al, Caleb, I love you. And New X-Men Volume 2, aka Academy X. Go read it. It's wonderful.
Yeah, so this is definitely a little bit off the beaten path for me. It's sort of a deep cut X-Men comic, apparently. And I think the fact that it doesn't follow any of the real major big players in the X-Men franchise might be a plus for me.
Yeah.
I may actually go ahead and give this one a try, because getting away from the never-ending gene of it all, I think may be the right thing for me. So, yeah, a side book like this might be just up my alley, Chris.
And I wanted to spin a whole episode out of this, Dave, but you famously said, I can't think of 3 times that I was wrong. But the only reason that I wanted this episode was that I was so wrong about Emma Frost, and I'm so sorry. I love her. She's one of my all-time favorite characters now. And that's what happens when you read a book by a horrible individual like Joss Whedon. And no wonder that I didn't like her, because that was one of my first samplings. And when you look at the history of someone like Joss Whedon, oh, no wonder he wrote her that way. And so if you're looking for the real Emma Frost as this headmistress, she's just a baddie, Dave, and you're going to love her in this. She's a teacher, she's a mentor, and she wields that power all for the children. She is all about these kids, and seeing her stand up to the Avengers in the best interest of these children to save their lives, it is absolutely inspirational, and I love Emma.
I'm definitely going to have to give this one a chance now, man.
All right, that wraps up another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. Where else are you going to hear me ramble about mutants for 45 minutes on end? If you like what you hear, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Give us a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app of choice, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, Amazon, what have you, or nerdbyword.com.
And if you want to talk to us about some of our takes and opinions, please find us on social media. We are on Twitter and Instagram at NerdByWord, and individually at ThatNerdDave and at ThatNerdChris.
And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez, with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.